But just to give some context about what that means, we were at 110, it looks like we'll be at 80,000, right? So that means that we were losing someone in our country to addiction every 5 minutes 2 years ago, and now we've moved to losing someone every 7 minutes. So clearly we are headed in the right direction, and what we're doing is working, but there's still a tremendous amount of work to do. Also, fascinating, the University of Michigan puts out a study each year about what people that are 12 to 18 are doing in terms of what drugs they take, and this surprised me. All drug use amongst people 12 to 18 since 2020 has gone down. Even marijuana has gone down, drinking has gone down. I know, it sounds good, but the other part of it is that fatalities have gone up. So there are less people using and more people dying, right? Part of that is because what is in the drugs that's being taken out there. And if you don't know, that's 12 to 18. Amongst people 18 to 49, if you are in that category, you are statistically more likely to die of an overdose than you are from a car accident, cancer, or guns. It is the #1 killer of people 18 to 49, which is the workforce of America, right? So that's why we need to be here having this conversation about what it is. So why are we here on a Broadway stage, right? Because me and many of the people we work with believe that the arts have the power to change narratives. In fact, we have seen that time and time again, that shows change the way we think, change the way that we understand the world. So I'm working with the Clinton Foundation. I made a commitment to action to put naloxone, which is a life-saving drug, into every Broadway house, in the front and the back. And we want to share the great news. We're able to be here tonight. We're able to have this conversation because of the fantastic people here at Redwood. And I want to let you know that Second Stage, an amazing theater that works out of the Hayes, has agreed to be the first theater to have it front and back for everybody. President Clinton says that naloxone should be as available as a fire extinguisher, right? And that is our goal. You hope that you never need to use it. If you go your whole life without seeing a fire extinguisher, that's great. But if you ever need one, thank God that it's there, right? That's the goal that we're working towards. Hello! So I want to go ahead and introduce our guests. This is Dr. Cunningham, who is the Commissioner of Recovery Services in New York State. And this is David Wilke, who is the Vice President of Hazelden Betty Ford. And we have a third guest that either I am bringing out or someone else is. Wonderful, wonderful. Is that happening now? Great. No, I think we're good. I think we're good. While you two are out here, let's go ahead and start. So, one of the things that we saw in the show tonight is the way that addiction faces families, right? And the way that it does. Can you just talk a little bit about what it is that you're doing and the way that your work affects families? Is there a part of it?
Absolutely. So I'm going to give you a little correction. I'm the Commissioner for the New York State Office of Addiction Services and Supports. And we do everything.
Hi, everybody. I'm holding her hand because I want to hold her hand, but also because she's wearing heels and we're on a slant. And yeah, she's not.
Sorry, I didn't know I was wearing treacherous footwear.
I just want to say thank you for staying, and thank you to all of you for doing this and raising awareness and shining a light on this very important topic. I've done enough tonight. I'm going to hand over the mic.
That's a really great entrance. The rest of us just walked out. You got brought up. That's phenomenal.
You know, I'll get home and I'll be like, what did you do today to my husband? And he'll tell me whatever he did. I'm like, well, I'll tell him what I did. I was like, and then he did himself walked me.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, mic drop.
So we're talking about just what is the work that each of your organizations do when it comes to recovery services, especially as it affects families. As we saw tonight, just losing one person, we sometimes think of that as a number, but of course it affects a whole community, it affects a whole family. So if you can continue about that.
Yeah, so in New York State, we have the Office of Addiction Services and Supports. So we oversee all of the addiction services from prevention to treatment to harm reduction and recovery all across New York State. 1,700 programs, over 730,000 people that we touch. So we are here to help prevent addiction. So we give tools for parents. So how to talk to your kids about substances and alcohol, you know, how to listen and getting the right knowledge about what's out there. You know, we have, you know, cannabis that's illegal, we have alcohol that's legal, we have fentanyl that's driving overdoses. So really tools for parents to be able to talk to their kids. We also have totally effective treatment. We know treatment works. It reduces risk of overdose by 50%. So cuts the risk of, in half for dying. There's medications, there's counseling, and there's a ton of treatment programs. We also do harm reduction where we go out into communities and do outreach so that we meet people where they are. And then we have recovery services like recovery centers and recovery housing. And so part of what we do is the Narcan, the naloxone that you will receive when you leave here, life-saving supplies so that if someone overdoses, you can save their life and you won't cause any problems. And we have these for free. You can order them online and we can ship them to anybody who lives in New York.
Wow. Oh my God, wow.
I also just want to put in a plug. Yesterday, the CDC just came out with new data. Overdose deaths in New York State are down by 32%. And that's because of medication. It's because of the Narcan that you're going to receive, so you can save a life.
Wonderful. David?
Well, I'm David Wilke. I'm with the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. So we are the nation's leading nonprofit provider of addiction treatment and recovery services in the country. Most people know our most famous center, the Betty Ford Center, founded by another First family. But we actually have 16 centers around the country in 9 states, and we have virtual services for individuals and families across the country. We have a center, outpatient center here in Manhattan. So if you or someone you know needs help, we have help here in Manhattan. We have the nation's leading center for youth and young adults, like Spencer in the show tonight, in Plymouth, Minnesota. So that we specialize in youth and young adult treatment for addiction. And then through our National Center for Families and Children across the country, we have programs and services for families like Jesse and Mel in the show, and for any of you that need help. Many of those programs are free thanks to donors, and we are here for you across the country. Here in Manhattan, addiction, treatment, recovery works. The other thing I'd like to say is one of the lines that stuck out for me in the show was the tree's greatest lesson is we need connection. And that line
Beautiful.
really epitomizes our approach at Hazelden Betty Ford, that treatment, recovery happens in community with connection. It does not happen alone in isolation. And we have a community across the country of people in recovery, families in recovery, people who are healing, and that healing and hope is possible for you or your loved one as well.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, John, and everyone here at the Nederlander Theatre, and everyone who is part of this extraordinary production. At the Clinton Foundation, we have engaged kind of in this arena in a few different ways over a number of years, and we partly got so engaged because tragically one of my father's closest friends lost his son to an accidental overdose. And so that kind of further fueled the sense of, well, whatever we were doing before, kind of in this area, we need to be doing more of it. We can even help save one person's life. That will have been more than worth the energy, time, effort, and investment. So what that has looked like in practice is we've helped, particularly like way back in the day, like 2018 and 2019, before Narcan and naloxone more broadly were available over the counter, available for free. We worked hard to kind of lower the price of Narcan so that places that really wanted to help be able to save a life places where people had shown to have a higher likelihood of overdose, were able to ensure that Narcan was available for the people who worked there, for other people who might be there, for the people who manage those places and spaces. We worked with, as just one example, a lot of fast food franchises. We worked with a lot of public libraries. We worked also with a lot of first responders, where in their budgets it hadn't been a priority, so that we could provide the Narcan so that the firefighter, the EMT, the police officer could show up and help save a life. That work thankfully still continues. We were able to distribute close to 1 million doses of Narcan throughout all of our countries. And now, so much of our efforts continue to focus on a destigmatization of addiction use disorders, and to work with partners who have kind of particular kind of authority and agency to hopefully ameliorate that stigma. Very mindful of what we were just hearing about, the importance of being in community. So we've done a lot of work with faith leaders around the country, including with people who bluntly, like I, might be on the other side of when it comes to reproductive health or gay rights or any of the areas where bluntly we may be in opposition. But if we can help equip them to talk in their faith communities about addiction use disorders in a destigmatizing, affirmative, community-minded way, if we can help support building meaningful connections to the services like what we heard from the first two people who spoke, and not those that have no evidence, no data, no science behind them, if we can help save a life, we feel like we have to do that. And so I'm very proud of all the work that we've done, and grateful for the chance to work with some likely and maybe even some unlikely partners, because we can't help someone get into recovery if we haven't saved their lives in the first place.
Oh, thank you. God bless.
So we hear a lot about naloxone, and we hear a lot about how we believe that many of the reductions that are happening is because it's out there, police officers have it, it's often where something's happened. But we do know also that in the upcoming Health and Human Services budgets, it has been zeroed out. What was $56 million last year will be, if this budget passes, zero this year. What is it that I think us as individuals can do to try to make sure that this type of life-saving drug is still available to people?
Well, can I take a stab at that? So there's been a lot of reporting, even in the last 24 hours, around how many members of Congress, including Republican members of Congress, are surprised as they're reading the details of the different pieces of proposed legislation that the Republican leadership, at least at the moment, intends to kind of coalesce into President Trump's like one big beautiful bill. I think that's a real opportunity, because there are Republican members of Congress who've already said no, they're not going to support this specific cut on Medicaid, or they're not going to support this specific cut on SNAP or supplemental nutritional and food assistance, what used to be called food stamps. I haven't really seen reporting on this, and I think it's because we haven't brought it to their attention yet. And so particularly for those of us who are here in New York, there are a lot of New York Republican congresspeople who bluntly want to get reelected in the midterm elections. We should make sure they know this is an issue that we as New Yorkers care a lot about, and that we'll be watching how they vote. And so I just think, I know you hear lots of people say, call your congresspeople, call your friends who live in different districts, but it really matters. They really track all of that data, and if they hear an upswell of concern about the zeroing out of the resources that have been so fundamental to distribute more than 100,000 doses of naloxone, train tens of thousands of first responders, have public education campaigns so that we, the public, know how to access naloxone, how to use it, and then help our friends be further educated on those fronts as well. I think it could make a difference.
Yeah, I just want to agree. Using our voices is critical. have the science, we have the data, we know what works, the naloxone or Narcan works, treatment works, recovery works, we know that. You know, and I'm also proud of what we're doing in New York State. Our governor and our attorney general is really standing up and fighting. You know, the federal government told us we had $400 million in cuts that happened overnight, and our attorney general, along with 22 other states, you know, came together to really push back, and now this is in the courts, and those cuts have not happened yet, but we need more of that. And so I am proud of what's happening here in New York State, and we need all of the states and all of you to really use your voices to say, these are life-saving, literally life-saving. You can save a life with the naloxone you receive today when you leave here. And we need funds to be able to continue that, to continue to have the overdoses decrease. So please use your voices.
We know that addiction doesn't discriminate, right? It happens in cities and rural areas, it happens in blue states and red states, it happens kind of in families all over our country. And we know too that there's been overwhelming, not even bipartisan support, but nonpartisan support for kind of further investments in research to continue to know how to help treatment work even more efficiently and effectively, what prevention does work, how do we help equip all of us so that we can save a life if we're ever called to do so in this way. And so I would just say, again, I think there are plenty of parts of the federal budget that I am deeply concerned about and worried we are not going to be able to ameliorate the forthcoming ideologically driven pain and suffering. But this is an area where I really do think that we can make a difference, and we have to try with urgency because of all of what we've already heard on this stage and saw on this stage of how much it makes a difference, and how I think there's then a moral obligation but also a political imperative to try.
Wonderful.
I completely agree with everything we just heard. I would just say, you know, the question is what you can do. And we believe at Hazelden Betty Ford that recovery works, that a program of treatment, evidence-based, effective treatment is critical and it works, but the first step is staying alive. And so naloxone helps people stay alive so they can get into their program of treatment, recovery in their communities, in their homes. And so that's what you can do, is go out and spread that message, just as you've heard, because we know that it works.
Wonderful. Last question. There's a lot of research that says it often doesn't matter what resources are available. If people feel like their job, work, friends, community is going to treat them differently when they research it or reach out to get it, then they won't take advantage of it, right? And we often call this stigma, but it's just the idea that you don't do any research until it's 4 a.m. and you feel like then you really need it. And we just saw a show tonight that works to break that down. I'm curious what all of your opinions are. How valuable are stories like this, are narratives like this, in helping the average person to understand that it is not a moral failing, but that it is a disease of the brain, and that there are steps, just like diabetes. We don't wait till someone's lost a leg before we put them on diabetic medication. You can be pre-diabetic, right? Your doctor tells you if you don't make changes, this is how things are going to be. How valuable are stories like this in terms of changing that narrative?
These stories are incredibly valuable. I say all the time, the biggest barrier around addiction and addiction treatment is stigma. We're coming along, but we have a lot further to go. And I think it's really through these stories that connect us as human beings. You know, and I don't know a single family that doesn't have addiction somewhere in the family. I think we have to talk about it, we have to get it out of the shadows, we need to hear each other's stories, because there is hope, there is treatment, there is effective, resources out there. So we in New York State we have a lot of public awareness campaigns. Hopefully you've seen some of them if you've been walking around New York City, that just says, you can save a life. Here's naloxone, scan a QR code, we'll send you the naloxone in the mail in a week. We have podcasts. We put stuff on social media so you can hear more of the stories about people's struggles, but also people's successes. And so really, I think the more that we can really talk about this, get this out of the shadows, normalize it, see, shows like this, that really it'll reach more and more people to know that there are resources, there is hope, there is treatment, and overdose deaths are preventable.
I completely agree. These stories are really important. I think one of the stigma or the misperception that really is the #1 barrier to people receiving help is the idea that it doesn't work, that treatment doesn't work. We see the stories and movies and TVs and sensational reality television of return to use and downfalls and the down and out. But we at Hazelden Betty Ford and across the country, the recovery community across the country, are millions of people who have recovered from addiction and are leading lives better than they could have ever imagined. And the story we saw tonight is obviously a healing story of Jesse healing with the help of others. That is the root of our community, and that is the story we need to continue to tell, that healing is possible, there is hope, that people live amazing lives in recovery from addiction. Families heal and grow and thrive after experiencing addiction in their families, and reach out for help because it works.
Wonderful.
And I would also say we know how to maybe not obliterate stigma, but certainly minimize its potency and its kind of harmful halo, because we've seen what has happened when we've had concerted efforts in breast cancer. As one example where we owe so much to Betty Ford and to her husband for being so open about her cancer diagnosis and permitting herself to be photographed in her hospital room, which was a really kind of, I think, underappreciated, significant moment in the effort to stigmatize breast cancer. We certainly have seen it when we kind of think about how we talk about HIV today, of how we talk about other kind of chronic diseases and illnesses, which addiction certainly is one of those. And so we know that sustained efforts across both, I think what we heard so beautifully said, stages like this, but also the proverbial and actual kitchen counters really matter. I was at an event last week and I was quite struck when one of the speakers got up and said, I just want to share something. I'm 9 days away from being 10 days sober. And we're like, all right. And then someone else was like, you know what? I'm 9 days away from being 10 years sober. I was like, what a profound moment that just happened about something that wasn't addiction related. And someone was saying, like, I'm at the beginning of my journey, and someone was saying, I'm not at the end of my journey, but you certainly can get much further along than you may believe is possible. And so I just think we have to continue to have explicit moments, like what we certainly can experience with stories like and including Redwood, and we have to have the unexpected moments too. And collectively, I do believe that we will move stigma much further away from being kind of the miasma of harm that it is currently in this area.
I love that. Can we have a big hand